Carl Jha. He is host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China's regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha. You can follow him on his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk, letter N. You can subscribe and support his podcast through patreon.com, Silk and Steel. Carl, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
Hi, Jamar.
Excellent. Carl, I asked you to come on because apparently there's a conversation that took place between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. And I pulled up the Chinese readout. The Chinese readout is fascinating. Now, I want to point out a few things in this readout, and I want to get your take on it. So Global Times has posted the entire readout. And in the readout, China says a few things to make their point of view very, very clear, brimmingly clear. But they do it in this kind of muted language. Chinese President Xi Jinping on Thursday had a phone conversation with U.S. President Donald Trump at the latter's request, meaning the U.S. asked for this. We didn't. They want to make it clear from the very beginning. The first sentence to make it clear. Xi said on Thursday that the dialogue and cooperation are only correct choice for China and the United States. In his talk, let's keep going. Xi said that recalibrating the direction of the giant ship of China-U.S. relations require two sides to take the helm and set the right course, adding that it is particularly important to steer clear of various disturbances and disruptions, like your tariffs, your tariff war, that. Noting that the suggestion of the U.S. side, again, they're pointing out the U.S. wanted this. The two countries' lead officials recently held economic trade meetings in Geneva. Xi said it marked an important step forward in resolving the relevant issues through dialogue. Now, what he also points out in this is the only way we could really have any kind of relations is if through respect. Basically, you need to respect us as an equal. Otherwise, this goes nowhere. And he keeps saying the U.S. asked for this phone call. We did. The U.S. asked for that meeting. We did. It says it's all through the readout. Give me your take on this. I'm fascinated by this. It's muted, but it's clear as a bell. Give me your thoughts.
Well, first of all, what Xi Jinping did is he reiterated China's position, which has always been that the door is open for talks, but the talks must be based on mutual respect, which means no bullying. China is opposed to unilateral bullying tactics, what Trump would call the art of deal. China don't buy that shit. And right now, China hold all the cards. One of the reasons Trump is really upset is he's upset about China's ban on rare earth exports. Now, first of all, if you're upset about China banning rare earth export, then why would you slap on additional chip sanctions on China right after Geneva? This is right after Geneva when Trump administration came out with additional ban against NVIDIA AI chips, and they threaten anybody who use Huawei AI chips. Anybody, including Chinese company doing business in.
Okay, Carl will be back. I promise you he'll be back. He told me that they were having difficulties with... He'll be back. He'll be back. There it is. Okay. Let's add him to the stage. There we are. Welcome back. I told him you'll be back. No issues. Just keep going.
Okay. So, Trump is upset at this rare earth, and he claimed that there was a deal in Geneva where China agreed to resume rare earth shipment. But from the Xi Jinping readout, it doesn't seem like China has agreed to such a deal at all, because Xi Jinping was very clear: we have abided by our end of the agreement, and we always stick to our words. And what happened after Geneva? Trump immediately slapped additional AI chip sanction against China that banned NVIDIA exports. They disallow anybody to use Huawei AI chips. Even for Chinese company doing business in China, selling exclusively to Chinese customers, if those Chinese companies use Huawei chips, they are quote unquote violating U.S. export controls. which will be means they will be placed on U.S. entity list and be blacklisted. So how can China work with? I mean, why would China resume rare earth export under such condition? And on top of that, Trump also just banned Chinese students from studying in U.S. And that apparently is used as a bargaining chip. This is how Trump his art of deal. You raise up your demand like crazy and then force the other side to come down to somewhat acceptable deal. Am I still on, or is it I only see you now? Okay, so this is the whole Trump deal is he always makes this outrageous demand, but this is not how China works. It's like, look, we don't play. You playing hardball tactics won't work with us. We have all the cards. We have the rare earth. You don't. China controls 90% of the rare earth refining. And people are saying, oh, but rare earth is not rare. It's everywhere. Yes, China only produced 60% of the rare earth, but even for the 40% of the rare earth that was produced elsewhere, guess what? They have to ship to China to have it refined, to make into magnets, to be using in automobiles, and to use for U.S. weapon systems. But because U.S. and control all the technology that's involved in refining rare earth, and right now China has imposed a global ban because they know U.S. will try to purchase through its allies like South Korea, Japan, and China's like, no rare earth leaves China. So now Wall Street Journal just reported that for global automakers, including U.S. automakers, if they're to resume production, they have to move some part of their production to China because China's basically said, no rare earth leave our shore, no rare earth magnet leave our shore, but they haven't placed a restriction against parts that contain those rare earth magnets. So now the US automakers are thinking about moving production of their auto parts to China that needs those magnets. So they to skirt around this restriction. So that means more manufacturing going to China. And this is a result of Trump policy. This is why Trump is panicking right now. And Trump, she just says, we made no such promise about rare earth. We don't know what you're talking about. So, you guys have to show some sincerity, like to show that we are equals, to show some respect, right? That's what she has been saying all along. Show some respect. You can't do all this crazy blackmailing. Essentially what Trump was doing, banning Chinese students, raising export control on AI. These are Trump's bargaining chip. He's trying to raise the stake. She's like, no, we don't play that game. No rare earth for you. No rare earth for you. That's it.
I know, like, no soup for you, sir. No soup for you. And Hegseth. Like, we can't ignore Hegseth going to Shangri-La. I mean, apparently in Malaysia, no less, like just 30 minutes away from me, and is making a speech where he is effectively declaring war because Taiwan is a red line. And so if you're effectively arguing that you're going to militarily defend Taiwan, and then with Trump saying, we respect the one China policy, how does that work together? Like, this is not negotiations, right?
This is what U.S. always do.
Go ahead. I don't find
always speak with a forked tongue. This is what U.S. calls strategic ambiguity, right? At the one hand, they say they abide by Taiwan one China principle, but at the same time, they will continue to sell weapons to Taiwan because that benefits the U.S. military-industrial complex, which is what U.S. all about nowadays. We have nothing else but military Keynesianism. So, and Taiwan is one of our best customers because Taiwan actually have a huge dollar surplus from their trade of selling us chips. But we want to recycle that dollar back. What do? We give them useless but expensive weapon platform. We know they will be totally useless against China because we're selling them stuff like Abrams tanks. What the hell are you going to use Abrams tanks for in Taiwan? By the time you need to use Abrams tanks, on Taiwan, it's too late. That means the Chinese PLA already landed. But that's besides the point. Besides the point is always about grift. And there's actually a recent Wall Street Journal article
Mhm.
reporting on the U.S. Navy talking about the recent concluded operation in Red Sea against Houthis, against Yemeni
Right.
forces. And it says, well, despite all the difficulties, we felt this was a good exercise for warm up for our for high end conflict with China. And I'm like, okay, this does not bode well for U.S. Navy. You're telling me you just lost 3 F-18 fighter jets against a country with no air force and no air defense, and you have to like basically sign forced to sign a deal with Yemen after wasting billions of bombs, and then you're saying you're ready to take on China when you are losing planes and your planes almost got shut down by Yemeni missiles. China
Yep.
has much better missile. Like this U.S. Navy is not even ready to take on Iran. I mean, right now there are talks of Israeli lobby trying to intensely lobbying Washington to start a war with Iran right now. But U.S. Navy, you can't even handle Houthis. You can't, forget about China. You can't even handle Iran. This is just crazy talk. But all these crazy talk, how is they're creating all these noises by leaking to mainstream media to
Mhm.
to 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 fan this atmosphere. It's fear mongering. What the fear mongering does is to convince the U.S. public to accept the big beautiful bill, which increase the deficit but increase our defense budget. This is why our defense budget must be over $1 trillion, even though we're not fighting any major wars, right? And because that's where all this fear mongering is useful. It's useful to justify to the U.S. public why we got to put more money into the defense spendings.
But they always do it. I mean, like the defense budget always goes up. It doesn't matter that there's no major wars. It just always goes up. It's like a force of nature. And Donald Trump at one point opined, hey, maybe we'll cut it by 50%. And then, a couple of days later, we're going to increase by $1 trillion. Okay, dude. And by the way, that doesn't even account for the increase to the deficit. I mean, they're talking about putting $20 trillion on the debt. Those are just tax cuts. Those are tax cuts. They're going after Social Security, Medicaid. They're going after all that stuff. And then they're like, now we can give tax cuts to the top 1%. Hey, by the way, Bob, who's making $20,000 a year, you're going to get $5 extra a year, buddy. Aren't you happy? Well, Elon Musk is going to get like $10 billion. It is outrageous. The defense budget is just
maybe not
one of those
now.
things.
Maybe
He's still going to get it.
Elon Musk not going to get those subsidies.
He's still going to get it. He's still going to get it. Because you know what's going to go on? Man, that fight is hilarious. It is just two oligarchs going at each other that pop off on Twitter in general. Oh, it's just the funniest thing in the world. I wouldn't be shocked if Elon Musk shuts down Trump's Twitter account. He just go in one day and just bloop, just off. But I guess my point is, like, even if you give it the tax credits on Twitter, on the EVs, the tax cut itself and the amount of money that it's going to shovel in the hands of people who are rich, it's going to be billions of dollars that Elon Musk is going to get either way you look at it. So even with this feud, the fact that the big, beautiful bill goes through, Musk is going to make out like a fat rat. It's just outrageous. I agree with you. What is China thinking about this? Like, the reason I'm always super curious about this, it's one thing, European governments, Western governments, we have a mindset. And that mindset is often dominance. It's, either I can win or I can lose, but I'm going to try to win. It's not about cooperation. Yes, we will be vassals. And so, you would get Starmer, Maris, all of these people, extending the hand at the king. They would do that. But we don't believe in cooperation as a hegemon any more than Britain believed in cooperation as a hegemon, right? China does believe in cooperation, though. And I have this persistent question. The U.S. is continuously going after Taiwan. It's going after it for obvious reasons. We found a weak point. We found a point that is a thorn in China's paw. And we're going to keep pushing at it and pushing at it and pushing at it. And either one of two things happens. Either China let us take it away where we can militarize it and have it as a US platform, or China militarily goes after it to stop it. Maybe this can be a political change where if the government in Taiwan changes to one that is not just whack jobs that wants to turn Taiwan into Ukraine. But if that's not true, then China has two options. Do I get involved militarily or do I let it go? And I don't think they're going to let it go. But the US is keep pushing for that outcome. How does China see this? Like, what is their, I'm trying to understand their view on this because they're going to have to do something.
Well, China actually understands perfectly that U.S. is trying to use the Taiwan issue to bait China into doing to possibly start a military confrontation.
Exactly.
U.S. is obsessed with this idea of 2027, a war breaking out over Taiwan. I mean, it doesn't actually make the 2027 timeline doesn't make sense from the Chinese perspective because. Yeah. Why 2027? Why not wait 2030? China will have a bigger fleet, more advanced weapons. They will have their 6th generation fighter jets filling the air while the U.S. 6th generation fighters still not ready. They will have so much more advantage in 2030 than 2027. So it doesn't make sense to start 2027. So this is U.S. schedule because they realize if they wait until 2030 and after, China will be too big, too powerful. It's too late. Exactly. So China understands this. This is why, even though U.S. has been pushing and pushing, now recently there was another revelation. I think in WAPO or Wall Street Journal, they say U.S. actually secretly deployed 500 military troops on Taiwan already. Right. This is pretty big. Like one of the foundational block of Sino-U.S. relationship. It was back in 72 when Nixon went to China. He signed the Shanghai Communique, which recognized the one China principle. And after that, U.S. pulled its troops out. U.S. used to have nukes on Taiwan pointing to mainland China before 19.
Did they? I didn't know that.
After that, they did. They had nukes and nuclear tipped missiles on Taiwan pointing at mainland China. And they were thinking about using it back in 1958 on multiple occasions. One time in 1958 and one time in the 1960s. So one of the part of the normalization of U.S.-China ties in 1972 when Nixon visited China was, okay, we're not going to do this crazy stuff anymore. We're going to pull back. So after 1972, U.S. cut funding to the Tibetan rebels. Up to 1972, CIA was still funding the Tibetan rebels to launch guerrilla raids into Tibet, and they have nuclear tipped missiles pointing at mainland China. So all that was taken off the table after Nixon visit, and that led to the normalization of ties. Right now, because the United States is trying to bring the Cold War 2.0 back, so that's why they're trying to add back all these military hardware used for the containment of China, but China is not taking because China hold all the cards. China has the time on its side. China can afford to wait. You know what? No rare earth for you. No matter what you do, we're still not giving you a rare earth. What are you gonna do? Your weapon, your military industrial complex won't able to function without the rare earth. Without those rare earth magnets, what are you gonna do? You're still not gonna get our rare.
He'll be back. No rare earth for you. Look, the reason why he's pointing that out is because our auto industries, our military runs on those rare earth minerals, and if we don't have them, those things don't work. As he pointed out, the auto companies had talked about actually moving some of their manufacturing to China because they need access to even do production. And apparently, at least one automaker in the United States has stopped production because they don't have what's necessary to do the production. And so this plan, it seems to be a fool's errand by the Trump administration. No, please, keep going, Carl. You're fine. I was just talking to the audience explaining why the rare earth thing is significant, why it's a big deal. It's like if your auto industry can't function, if your military can't function, if you can't make more trucks, especially if those things are being blown up, that's a pretty big deal. Yeah, that's a pretty big deal.
Well,
How?
yeah,
No,
China is in no hurry to resolve the Taiwan issue because Taiwan itself right now it's going through some political turmoil. Recently had large scale protests against the Taiwan
no.
government. 300,000 people attended. You never heard this in mainstream media, by the way. You would not know about this if your source is English language mainstream media. You would not know there's a large scale protest against the government on Taiwan.
Real quick, I'm sorry to
Because
interrupt.
that
Correct
goes
me if I'm
against
wrong.
all kind of narrative.
No, please. I'm sorry to interrupt. Real quick, the leading party. I'm going to get the party wrong. KMT is the leading party, correct? Or am I wrong? Is that the opposition? But whichever is the leading party was
The leading
legal.
party, the ruling party on Taiwan is DPP, the Democratic
Okay, DPP.
Progressive Party.
That's what it is. So the KMT is the
Their
opposition party.
official party platform. Their official party platform is actually to achieve Taiwan independence, right? Which is one thing that China said would trigger the war response. So DPP, they have been in power for many years now. They have been in power for a full decade, but they never declare independence because they know the consequences.
know.
So instead, they was try to wiggle their way around, say, "Oh, we don't need to declare independence because the Republic of China on Taiwan is already independent. It's already an independent entity, so we don't have to declare it, right?" So this is how they wiggle out their own party platform, and China knows this, So China is not in a hurry to push the button. And it's right now it's the US that's trying to create tensions, because
Yes.
tensions justify weapon sales. And China is not taking the bait so far because again, China hold all the cards. Like we saw what happened during the tariff war. When United States depend on 80% of its pharmaceutical ingredients from China, how the hell are you going to fight a war? Your hospital is going to shut down. You're not going to have any rare earth. You're not going to have get any antibiotics. I mean, it's crazy talk to go to war against China.
There's a saying that capitalists will say the rope used to hang themselves. That's what this feels like. It's like these things are vital interests that they've decided, hey, let's have our military be dependent upon another country, whatever that country is. I don't care what that country is. Let's have our military be completely dependent upon this other country to get a product. And it's like, why do you do that? Because we can save money that way, or we can make money that way. It's like, but they're vital interests. It's kind of like when China is building a subway, when they're building a power plant, when they're building high-speed rail, that stuff is public interest. And they're getting money from oligarchs, meaning they're using capitalism almost like like riding a bear and using the fruits of that bear in order to invest in things that are vital interests to the public. We don't think that way. In our minds, we have a capitalistic system that is the religion of the country. And so globalism just seemed like a natural extension of that religion. And now we want to be, provocative. We want to be aggressive and belligerent. And yet you're dependent upon the place that you're being belligerent against. It's so irrational. It makes no sense. And yet this is where we are. It's just astonishing to me. What do you think is going to happen with this? So you think basically the U.S. is, because nobody said 2027. That came out of somebody in the United States. You think they're telling on themselves that they're effectively going to try to escalate things by 2027 in order to provoke China in a real sense of the word? Because, by the way, just real quick, South Korea was another situation where the U.S. seems to try to have provoked Yoon Suk Yeol to take over martial law. Just out the blue. It's like on a random Tuesday. Yeah, I'm going to declare martial law because of the Chinese and North Koreans. Just random. And you had people in South Korea throwing their bodies on the parliament to protect their parliament in order to protect their democracy. They overstepped. They wanted or had a disbelief that South Korea was going to be compliant. Ergo, martial law. Basically, we like dictatorships because dictatorships are compliant. I guess my point is, and the same thing with Taiwan, it seems like they're trying to escalate this. And maybe 2027 is their year to escalate, not China. Every accusation up to this point was a confession.
Okay, it's very simple. U.S. by itself, it cannot contain China or confront China. This is why U.S. need to corral its allies, force its vassal states to go along this anti-China bandwagon. Because U.S. have to cross the so-called the tyranny of distances, cross the entire Pacific to fight China. So in order to fight China, they're gonna need bases. They're gonna need bases in Philippines, in Japan, in South Korea. That's why they try to loop all of them into this anti-China alliance. But South Korea was the first one to break. And now after Trump applied all these crazy tariffs against Japan, they just slapped the auto tariff 25%, and now they just announced 50% steel tariff, right, against Japan. So against the world, but also Japan. Japan is gonna get hit, and Korea, and so there's no incentive for South Korea and Japan to work with United States right now to contain China. And in fact, they are working with China to form a free trade zone in East Asia that will contain 2 billion people. And so, the idea that they want to loop South Korea and Japan together against China, it's ridiculous. If back in the Obama days, that might have been possible, because Obama is all about coalition building, and he can turn on his charm to convince Europeans, Japanese, South Korean to go along. But Trump is very.
Trump is not that guy. Carl, thank you for this. Carl Jha, and just to give his thing, he has a fantastic site, by the way. His time is up anyway. Carl Jha is fantastic. This is just a taste of Carl. Carl Jha is host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China's surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha. Follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk In. Fantastic podcasts. And subscribe and support their podcast on patreon.com, Silk and Steel. Carl does, which is mind-blowing when you think about it, a podcast where he goes through. Carl, we've come to the end. I was giving your outro. I'll just let you say, where can people find you? I already gave it, but just as a what's the word I'm looking for? As an elegant end to the segment, where can people find you? Let people know.
My internet is killing me.
You are perfectly fine. We knew it in advance. It's okay. You're fine. Okay. Okay. Carl is fantastic. He does this arc of history for China, 5,000 years. So where you see shows like the Great War, World War II, the intervening years, there's a show that used to do that. If I'm being bluntly honest with you, I'm not a big fan of the guy who does it now. The guy who used to do it before, Indy, was fantastic. But Carl does that for the 5,000-year arc of history for China. So definitely check out his channel. Carl, where can people find you?
I am a prolific ship poster on X. Carl Za is my handle, and I also have a YouTube channel, Carl Za, which is a little bit more professional. And for the best quality of my product, you got to go to Patreon, where you search for Silk and Steel podcast. Just search Silk. I think the first podcast show up will be mine, Silk and Steel podcast, where I cover the whole 9 yards of Chinese history from the very beginning. Now I'm doing chronological retelling. Now I'm at 400 BC. So
you have a long way to go.
A long time to go. I'm not in a hurry. Just like China itself. I'm not in a hurry. I'm taking my time because time is on my side.
Carl, thank you for this, man. You're fantastic. I really appreciate it.